All right, let's begin. So hello, lovely humans. My name is Cassandra Osei, and I am a clinical research project manager with the Center for Health Equity Transformation, or CHET for short. Thank you all for joining this afternoon for our second Juneteenth celebration event, presented in collaboration with the Feinberg Office of Diversity and Inclusion. This event is intended to not only bring our Northwestern and Greater Chicagoland community partners together, but to also engage our audience in attendance with a dialogue on how modern and contemporary forms of art inspires activism and how art explores themes of liberation, which is a prime element of Juneteenth. We have a phenomenal panel of speakers today that I will go ahead and introduce. So first we have Dr. Kamasi Hill. Dr. Hill is a historian, theologian, art curator, filmmaker, and a modern day griot who has been teaching high school students for the past 25 years. He was born and raised on the west side of Detroit by parents who were curators of the Black arts, both visual and musical. He attended Howard University and graduated with a degree in film production. And from there, he won several awards for his documentary, Variations on Shabazz Barbershop. He then moved to Chicago in 2004 to attend Garrett Evangelical Theological Seminary at Northwestern University, where he received his Ph.D. in religion and historical studies. Since then, he's been collecting from contemporary artists of African descent for the past 15 years and has amassed over 150 pieces of art. He specializes in 20th and 21st century American religious history and culture, and their work explores various themes in African American history, religion, and popular culture. And as a comic book fan, Dr. Hill created a series of nonfiction graphic novels to help reorient students to the power of literacy and imagination. Thank you for joining us, Dr. Hill. Secondly, I'll introduce Yolonda Ross, who is an actress, writer, director, and producer. She made her feature film debut in the award-winning independent film Stranger Inside in 2001 and went on to win an IFP Gotham Award for Best Breakthrough Performance for her role, as well as received her first Film Independent Spirit Award nomination in the category of Best Debut Performance. Her second Spirit Award nomination was for her John Sayles drama, Go for Sisters. Yolanda has appeared in dozens of films, including Denzel Washington's award-winning film, Antoine Fisher, the independent film, Yelling to the Sky, and the commercial hit Whitney, directed by Angela Bassett for the Lifetime Movie Network. She's also portrayed recurring characters on several high-profile series, including Miss Green in the hit Baz Luhrmann Netflix series, The Get Down, and Claudia on How to Get Away with Murder. Yolanda made her award-winning directorial debut with the 10-minute hybrid music video short film, Breaking Night, about a young girl taking control of her destiny, and is a member of the prestigious Labyrinth Theater Company in New York. And she has reprised her role as Jada in season 4 of the critically acclaimed Showtime series, The Chi, created by Emmy winner Lena Waithe. And last, but certainly not least, Bayeté Ross Smith. Bayeté is a photographer, artist, and education worker who lives in Harlem, New York. He's a presidential leadership scholar, a TED resident, a Creative Capital awardee, an Art for Justice Fund fellow, a BPM Plus grantee, and a POV New York Times embedded media maker. His work is in the collections of the Smithsonian Institution, the Oakland Museum of California, the Birmingham Museum of Art, the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, and the Brooklyn Museum. He has exhibited internationally with the Goethe Institution in Ghana, Photo Museum in Belgium, Lanzhou Photo Festival China, and American House in Ukraine, among others. His collaborative projects along the way and Question Bridge Black Males have shown at the 2008 and 2012 Sundance Film Festival, respectively. His work has been featured at the Sheffield Doc Fest and the LA Film Festival. So welcome to all of our decorated panelists, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. So before we delve into the real Q&A, I'd love to give each and every one of you an opportunity to speak briefly about yourself and your work as artists and how that connects to the community activism that you all do. And to begin, I will go ahead and start with Bayeté.
Thank you very much, Cassandra. Hello, everyone, and happy Juneteenth to everyone. It's really interesting and kind of surreal that Juneteenth has finally become a federal holiday. It's something that, as a young African American, in middle school and high school, when I first learned about Juneteenth, I was like, this should be a holiday. This should be a holiday. And I would, say that amongst my family and friends. And it's a small step, but I think it is a very significant one. And I do think while there's a lot to be critical about the United States of America in terms of race relations and actually living up to what the Constitution is supposed to be, I think we can still take these small moments to give our society credit for moving in the right direction a bit. And so I'm in a very good mood today. It's very pleased that we've taken some of these steps. So I'm going to share my screen. I'm going to talk pretty quickly in order to not take up too much time. But feel free to follow up in the Q&A section or via email later on if I gloss over some of the work I've done too quickly and you all have questions. So as a interdisciplinary visual artist, a lot of my work examines the issue of identity, value, beauty, reciprocity, and the idea of culture and how that impacts the way we interact with each other as human beings, both on a interpersonal level and on like a macro level from group to group. I'm assuming everyone can see this image here, right? Okay, so this is an image I'll start off with. This is me and my cousins at Christmas, and we're all a Black family, we're African-American family. But as you look at each one of us, you notice significantly different features in terms of what we look like. And I think that speaks to this idea that identity is very malleable. And a lot of the check boxes that we use, while they can be useful at certain points in time, are often misleading if we look at them out of context. So we really have to delve deep into examining that. This is a series I created, one of my first major series that was really successful, called Our Kind of People. And what I was interested in this work was looking at how each of us respond and have some amount of unconscious bias when we see other people. So with this particular project, I selected real people. They're not models. And these are all outfits that they would have worn on a daily basis at the time when I photographed them. And I kept the lighting the same and the facial expression the same in each photo. So the only thing that changes from image to image is the person's outfit, or from subject to subject, what the person is wearing. And I wanted to light them so they were pretty portraits, but not overly glamorous, so that they seemed, not real, because there's an element of documentary here. And so what I was really interested in, again, is when the viewer encounters these images, no matter who the viewer is, they will project their own preconceived notions onto each one of these characters. And I think it's a really critical thing in artwork and media that we use that can enhance social change, to place people in positions where we're not telling them what to think, but we're creating scenarios where they question their pre-existing beliefs. Quick story about how identity is always susceptible to context. This is my friend Gene. He is Chinese American from California. His family has been in the United States for a few generations, as far as we know, and he has a pretty good understanding of his family history. Like, genetically, he is completely Chinese. I say that because when I exhibited these in Lanzhou at the photo festival, I was having a conversation with some of the Chinese people in China, and I mentioned that he was Chinese, and they were surprised. They're like, oh, he doesn't look Chinese to us. And that was really interesting. I couldn't quite get from them why that was. I assume it's a nuance of fashion, but that's kind of what I'm interested in exploring quite often in my work. My friend Alex here, depending on what he's wearing, sometimes he reads as Latino, sometimes he reads as Arab. He can read as a variety of different ethnicities. So again, there's the element of what we initially see when we see fashion, but also how do we ascribe identity to different people. This woman here, her name is Amber, but she is Afro-Latina. So some people read her as Black, some people read her as a different ethnicity and identity. And that's my friend Tony, who is just African-American. He just happens to be a lighter complexion. But again, depending on who's looking at his images, he reads its various ethnicities around the world to different people. So in addition to our kind of people, my work also examines, uses still photography and video, time-based work at certain points in time, and installation. So this is a series. I'm not going to show you the actual work. I'll just show you the shots, the documentation. But this is a series I did called West 4th Street. And what we did with this was we recounted a story of of interaction with the police. And then we had people of different backgrounds tell the same story. And then when you interact with it, you as the audience member can change who's speaking at any given time. So if you experience it online, you can swipe left and swipe right to change the speaker or hit the arrow keys. If you experience it in person, you can move in front of different screens. And basically what we're looking at here is how the identity of the storyteller affects your perception of the story. And then just real quickly, a recent project that I'm currently working on, and I'll put the link to the next episode that just published today in the chat. But it's a series called Red Summers VR. It's using 360 VR video, text, and testimonials from the descendants of survivors, looking at what has been historically called race riots from the early 20th century. But using 360 video, immersive video to do that in combination with archival images and animation. And what we're looking at here is how each of these incidents directly relates to the current social issues that we're facing now and how they created a ripple effect leading to our current social justice movements. So this is a scene that we did from the Greenwood District from the previous episode, which looked at Tulsa. Sorry, it's a little choppy because of my internet connection. Sorry about that. And these are some other pieces, another scene from that same one, kind of showing how we're blending the archival images of these events over the contemporary footage. So I just wanted to give you all a quick kind of overview and summary of some of what my work looks like, because it's, kind of, sometimes it's difficult to envision what is an interdisciplinary artist who works with art and media. And so I'm doing a lot of work in this vein to try and facilitate a shift in how we think about each other and think about how our history has led us to this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bayeté. That was phenomenal. A great introduction into who you are and a bit of the work that you do. And next, I'll ask Dr. Kamasi Hill to go ahead and tell us a bit about his work and what he does.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I appreciate the opportunity to share in this panel on on this topic. And in terms of my work, I think first and foremost, my primary profession is an educator, and one of the things everyone knows about being, especially a public school teacher, is by necessity, especially when you get started, you need to have multiple streams of income, because being a public school teacher doesn't necessarily pay well, especially at the beginning. It's much better now. So my artistry grew out of my own experience growing up in Detroit, as well as the necessity of needing another stream of income as well. And also, I would say my artistry was greatly impacted by my parents, who were Black nationalists involved in the Black power struggle in the 60s and 70s. So in terms of my artistry, when I attended Howard University, I went to Howard to become a filmmaker, and I ended up doing a documentary, as was stated, on a local barbershop in Washington, D.C. And that experience of being in that barbershop, recording the experiences and curating the conversations really shaped my perspective on not only in terms of politics, the fluidity of Black culture, the vibrancy of Black culture, but also the narratives within Black cultural production that aren't often explored. And I did my documentary before the barbershop movies. This documentary was done in 1993. So this was before the barbershop movies. I hadn't seen anything like it before, quite frankly. And, you're talking about a barbershop, which is, the beauty shop and the barbershop are two, pivotal institutions that have been a part of our community since the latter part of the 19th century. So to have no work really to explore, no creative work or very little creative work to explore our institutions, I thought was quite interesting. And so for me, it's all about uncovering. My art is always about uncovering these hidden narratives or very, very rarely explored narratives that are part of our tradition in our community. My Ph.D. is in religion. And one of my next projects that I'm working on now in pre-production is to explore the one aspect of religion that's very, very rarely talked about within Black America, and that is the history of atheists, Black agnostics, and Black free thinkers, which is almost never really talked about at all because, as Gaylord Wilmore said, African Americans are incorrigibly religious in so many ways. But, you're going all the way back to folks like Frederick Douglass, who used religion to articulate an understanding of freedom, but he himself was not a religious person. Black atheists, agnostics, and free thinkers have been in existence since our history in this country. So it's necessary for us to actually start to document and curate their experiences. And so that's one of the next projects I'm working on. For the past 15 years, however, I have been engaged in collecting art, Black art from the United States, as well as the Black diaspora. And I primarily collect from emerging artists, contemporary artists of African descent. So at the time that I wrote my biography, it's interesting, I didn't update that 150 number. It's like well over 300 pieces now. But I primarily like to collect from artists who are alive. I get a chance to meet them, talk to them, develop relationships with them, engage them about the art, the work that they produce. Sometimes they name it, sometimes I name it. It's a very kind of dynamic relationship that I have as a collector. And for me, it's important to support not only artists who are alive, but it's important to support artists who are local. And I tell people all the time when they come to my house and they see all this art, I tell them, 75% of every single thing on my wall or my floor was created by somebody who lives within a 10-mile radius of where I live, here in Chicago. So it's not like we have to go far to find people who are producing art. These are literally members of our community, members of our family, members of our institutions. And I think, if I had a goal in life, I would want every Black person in America to at least own one piece of art in their home from somebody in their local community. I mean, we do a great job of curating. Historically, we've done a great job of curating things like music, obviously clothes and shoes, So we adorn ourselves very well. I want to see a greater appreciation for adorning the walls of our home and the floors of our home, and pass that down and bequeath that to other generations. So that's been pretty much what I've been doing for the past 15 years. And then the last thing I'll say is I recently I've been teaching for 27 years. I'm transitioning to retire in the next 7 years, but I'm still, hopefully I'll still have some youthful energy. One of the things that I wanted to do was, still be connected in some way to helping young people learn about our history. And so I decided to merge my background as an educator with my current interest as an art collector and create a series of graphic novels. So I've hired different Black artists to create the pictures, and I've written the text. And so I'm doing a series of graphic novels called A Griot's History. And the first one will be coming out in the fall, and it's about the Great Migration. And so that's pretty much who I am and what I've been doing.
Thank you for sharing, Kamasi.
Mm-hmm.
So I see some of our audience members have shared some of the artists that they follow. So that's really dope. And I will go ahead and allow Yolanda to go ahead and introduce herself and talk about herself. And to do so, we're going to engage in a little mini Q&A. So Yolanda, can you go ahead and share with us how you got into acting?
Well, I got into acting, I want to say it's accidentally, but I don't think it was. I think the universe got me to where I was supposed to be. But in my life, how it happened was I was working in a store in Soho here in New York. And a friend of mine, she did background work on SNL. She got sick one weekend. I asked if I could fill in, and they let me, and they kept hiring me back every weekend. And that got me started. It got me my union card. It got me in. And from there, my first thing was New York Undercover. And with that, auditioning for a piece, I learned things about myself. Like my background, I've always been musical. So I play, several instruments. I paint, I write. And all of these things came together with creating characters. And with that, I learned I use music for all my art. Like everything, when it comes to me creating, music is where everything starts for me. And I have a huge repertoire. And after singing for a while, it's like you use your body as an instrument. So that is just one more part of what got me to understanding character, breaking down a script. I see the dialogue as like lyrics to song. So if I know how to emote through music, I can emote, for these characters in this way. So that was like a long roundabout way to say it, but that's how I got into acting. And I really do feel it was a matter of the universe, of God, whomever, to get me here. I paid attention to just signs in life and just went where I felt I should go. I didn't have a plan. I left home. I'm from Omaha, Nebraska. And I left home to come to New York to work in the fashion business. And that just kind of snowballed with access into then acting. And I realized this was what I was really moved by, and it utilized all my gifts. And now writing and directing, which then it's not just the character, it's the world you're creating. It's the way you want the world to be seen by others. It's what point of view you want them to take, when going on a journey. So I do like doing all of that.
How are you able to utilize this creative control that you've developed for yourself, the way that you use music in your acting, and transition that into any community activism or work that you do outside of your day job?
Well, you know what? I feel that my day job is really activism, a form of activism. The parts that I get to play, the characters that come through me, I feel are certain kinds of characters. I feel that I'm the Black woman that, as far as characters, women that you don't look at, women that you don't take the time to get to know. We know them, just like is it Bayeté? Bayeté, sorry. I just wanted to get it right.
Yeah, Bayeté, sorry.
Like the thing that he just showed where you see the different characters in different clothing. there are people in there that, you know, same people, but different outfits. And there are certain people we sum up to be one thing. We don't take the time to get to know them. And in my case, for what I do, I get to put on that outfit. I get to become them. And I also get to show you how they are outside of that outfit, how they get to where you then see them. And if it's a negative character or somebody that's done a negative thing, well, what got them there? Because people don't just start at the place you see them in. I feel that what I get to do is put on those characters, become them, show them compassion, show them to you, and that then helps others understand us better, I feel.
Okay. And as you are becoming these characters, have they provided any lessons that for you translate into your life as a Black woman who engages in various systems, many of which are unjust?
I feel they all do. I feel they all do because, you know, they're going through me. So I'm learning with each character I get to play, even if some of those characters are very much like me in some forms, they are not me, you know? So I would say yes. I mean, just as I am now dealing, you know, with the Center for Health Equity Transformation and some of the other organizations there in Chicago, I've been touched by cancer, but I've not gone through it. And I am now, you know, learning. I'm learning, you know, about these organizations. I'm learning about what the women, you know, and others go through. You know, I'm learning about the disparities. You know, it's like we know it, but we don't actually know it. And so I've learned from each and every one of them.
Thank you so much, Yolanda. So now we're going to go ahead and transition into the Q&A that is fundamental to this event. And I will begin with Kamasi. So as a historian, could you go ahead and provide us with a brief context of what Juneteenth is and the role that it plays for modern day Black liberation?
Oh, sure. No problem at all. So, you know, there are a couple of things that are pivotal kind of on the macro level to the formation of Juneteenth as a holiday. First and foremost, the Emancipation Proclamation, which was signed and essentially released, which was, of course, it was a war proclamation, which released men and women who were enslaved in the Confederate States. And that word was sent out, but it did not make it to Texas when it was initiated. Obviously, you know, lack of communication. Also, there's some intentionality, you know, about making sure that that message wasn't received in Texas during that time period. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, you know, one of the things that African Americans have historically done in this country is ensured that no matter what their experiences are, that they find moments to celebrate their own humanity. And so the kind of formative, formal aspect of Juneteenth was, you know, just recognizing the final word to the enslaved Africans in the state of Texas by Union General Gordon Granger, when he finally, you know, got there and said, look, you're free, you know, you can go. In 1865, 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed. And then the folks in Texas decided to, you know, honor that as a day, that June the 19th, as a day where they celebrate their freedom. But there's also the cultural element. So that's the political element. There's also the cultural and communal element of celebrating. And one of the things about Juneteenth historically is that folks, you know, got together, they played music, they dressed up, you know, they sang, they danced, they engaged and brought forth all of these cultural practices that sustained them, you know, during the institution of slavery for all those years. So while the formal Juneteenth is about, obviously, the, you know, enslaved Africans in Texas who recognize their own freedom, it's also about the celebratory aspect of the humanity of Black people, acknowledging that, you know, no matter what institution no matter what the institution of slavery did, it did not quell our desire for love and joy and expression of community and family and faith. And I will say one last thing is, the state of Texas acknowledged Juneteenth back in 1980. So this is not a new thing. In fact, over 45 states, have acknowledged Juneteenth over the years. It's interesting that we really haven't gotten that message, and a lot of folks are surprised and like, no, this has been in the, this is America. Stuff just don't happen. It takes a while. Martin Luther King's birthday wasn't simply, Stevie Wonder singing and then boom, everybody decided. No, it's a long process. And no matter what people feel, I know there are a lot of people who feel certain ways about when our moments of celebration become institutionalized because they can be controlled and defined and, capitalized on. I get that. But this is a long time coming. It's not simply something that people thought of a couple of years ago. This has been in the works for, like I said, since 1980. So several decades.
Thank you for that history, Kamasi. And we know that Juneteenth brings forth radical art, and art can look in many different ways. Twitter, even the way in which Black people tweet, is a form of art. And that certainly underscores that Blackness is inherently political. So I'll start with Bayeté and asking this question: what does that mean for the way Black artists tell stories and how non-Black audiences even consume them?
Well, Blackness is an interesting thing, right? Because Black people didn't create it. It was created by Europeans who had a commercial interest in dehumanizing Africans and Indigenous Americans. And, I think it's really effective to look at race and correlate it with caste as a starting point for how it's been utilized and how it functions in the West, North and South America. And I would, I'm pretty certain throughout the rest of the world too, but I can only speak definitively about the Americas. So that I say that to say that is why Blackness is inherently political, because we haven't gotten to a point where we can extract that identity from politics. But we didn't create Blackness, but we've had to make it our own, and that then becomes an inherently political act. And I think it's, interestingly enough, it's a political act that has actually grown to benefit a lot of people around the world, not just Black people, interestingly enough. So in terms of how we create work, I think we have to understand that there's not one way Blackness can function. Me and Dr. Hill both went to HBCUs, and a lot of times HBCU people think we're Blacker than all the other Black people, all the other African Americans and the African American population, but we're not, right? So it's understanding that there's a variety of different variables and valuable and valid stories that can be told. But we also have to understand that for better or for worse, we're going to have a certain responsibility laid upon the way we express ourselves. And we just have to be really thoughtful about contextualizing what we're expressing effectively. And I think, for people who aren't Black, consuming Black art and Black work, I think it's simply a matter of realizing that participating and consuming art and media based on a certain cultural experience are not the same as participating in that cultural experience. And so I think people can look at it as a way to be informed in a nuanced way that you can't always be informed by in direct conversation and reading, but also to not allow that consumption to give them a more heightened sense of understanding and resolution about the issues surrounding race in the United States and around the world. It's great to be entertained, and it's great to understand more culturally from being entertained with art and media. But there's in this case, what it really comes down to is there's a responsibility on the part of the creator and a responsibility on the part of the consumer. And I think if we talk through these things and we're not afraid to discuss them and properly contextualize them, I think there's a lot that we can take from this that'll benefit us all.
Thank you, Bayeté. Why are Black art and media even necessary tools for framing and facilitating social change? And I'll direct this question to Yolanda.
Well, I feel that they're very necessary because there's a specificity that we have when we are writing, for us, when we are bringing our stories to life versus somebody else who, outside of our race, our community, they, will write like in the past and currently still, people can be good writers, white writers, but at the same time, like I said, there's specificity in how we live, in how we deal with each other, that somebody outside of these households would not be able to bring to light. And so when then a Black viewer is watching from one of these different households, they can see themselves, like really see themselves, and know that the work has been done to make sure that they see themselves on screen. And I mean, I feel that it's really necessary because we're not all the same. We may all be, Black people are Black. None are Blacker than others. A light-skinned Black person is still Black. A dark-skinned Black person is still Black. Their household may be different because they might live in a different region. They might live in a different part of town. Their background might be Caribbean or some other background, but it's to show that we are not like 4 or 5 different types of people and be Black. There are a wide range of different mixtures of Black people. There are just different Black people, period. And to show that, I feel it's for us and it's for others. Just like I said before, the more versions of us people can see and understand, that's the big thing, is learning to understand that we are just as, we are just as big of a group of people as the different groups of white people, Irish, Italian, on and on and on and on. We are the same way. We have different backgrounds, different cultures within our culture, and people just need to learn them.
So it's the lesson of Blackness is not in a monolith, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
So Kamasi, it seems that in many ways you can't disconnect the historical and contemporary Black history from religion, as you mentioned earlier. And considering the origins of the classical Black nationalists, can that movement be sustained today in the current climate we are in? And in what ways has that movement engaged the Black arts movement of the 1960s and 70s?
A classical Black nationalist, we're very far away from that. Contemporary Black nationalism, I think we have a better shot at. But the classical Black nationalist of the Martin Delaney's, of the, of the Edward Wilmot Blyden's, even to a certain extent, the Marcus Garveys are, I think the state of the world in which we live in, particularly how the world is, the geopolitics of the world is much smaller due to technology, due to travel, transportation, due to, capitalism, and the impact of colonialism and imperialism. I don't know if classical nationalism can have a resurgence in our modern day context. I do think there are elements of contemporary Black nationalism that do have do show up within the context, within our current climate today. I think the challenge is going to be for that, how, these emerging generations of young African Americans are going to incorporate these classical notions of Black nationalism, or these contemporary notions of Black nationalism, with with technology. I think that's really going to be the challenge. And in terms of the Black, in ways that this movement has engaged the Black arts movement in the 1960s and 70s, I think we are, in many ways, I think we're closer there than anything else. Just simply because there's a lot of talk within Black artistic circles about representation and the need for naming and affirming identity within the context of artistic production, not excluding people's identity, politics, the kind of intersectionality, right? Not including gender and sexuality and race and class and all of these things from our art. And I think those conversations about making sure that our art, that we have a kind of a broader representation of our art, a lot of times they seem to be caught up in this kind of, especially within the context of Twitter and social media, they can seem at times very trite, but at the same time, I think there is something to it. I'll give you a prime example. The most recent issue that came up with regard to In the Heights, the film by Lin-Manuel Miranda, and the representation of Afro-Latinx people, and the erasure of them at least in the primary and lead roles of that film is a very important discussion to have. I think the burden of it obviously is falling on one film, but there's a much bigger conversation to have, because it's not like, that's the only cultural production that features Latinx people. I mean, there's so many different, there's telenovelas, there's, when I was in Brazil, several years ago, the telenovelas, and I'm sure, like Brazil and other countries, are huge. Very few Afro-Brazilians are represented in those, telenovelas, and, Afro-Brazilians are all over Brazil. Just like you can't hide from Afro-Brazilians, but you don't see them a lot. And so I say all that to say it's a necessary conversation to have when it comes to representation in art. And I think that's the legacy of the Black nationalist movement, of the Black arts movement, is acknowledging the diversity of our experiences within our art, centering the often forgotten narratives around the intersectional ways Black identity surfaces in life with regard to gender and sexuality and class and all of these things, and also giving space for non-traditional voices and non-traditional spaces to present art as well. Obviously, the use of technology has increased that. I see people who are able to make a living producing art just on Instagram. They're showing their stuff on Instagram and they're able to sell it and make a living. And I think those are ways in which we should be able to, further this conversation about how we create and continue to push the envelope on Black cultural production in terms of art, is that we utilize all these spaces and we acknowledge the varying identities of our people.
Thank you, Kamasi.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Bayeté, kind of in the same line of questioning, in critical race theory, there is an examination between race and racism and its relationship with law. And we know that legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw, who coined the term, was clear on stating that it is not a noun, but in fact a verb, and explores how the social construction of race and institutionalized racism perpetuates a racial caste system that in some ways pushes Black individuals into a second-class citizenship. So my question to you is, why is critical race theory an important underpinning for creative endeavors in order to advance justice?
Yeah, well, I think there's a simple answer to that, but once you dig deeper, there's levels to it and it becomes more complicated. But the simple answer is that to understand the history of the Americas, you have to understand the history of race, because that's fundamental to what happened in all of the Americas, whether you're talking about Canada or Argentina or anywhere in between. And so the way that plays out in each country and region's individual history and therefore culture is very critical to understanding the current social landscape. I was DMing with some friends of mine in Colombia the other day, the country, and there's some pretty hectic things going on down there. I don't want to get sidetracked into a whole conversation about geopolitics in South America per se, but one of the things that that conversation was reminding me of is this group of friends are Afro-Colombians, and that's a big part of their sense of identity. They refer to themselves as Afro-Colombians, Afro-descendant Colombians. And there's a unique scenario where they face a certain set of social and political issues that they're trying to battle against for equity that are a little bit different from Colombians of other backgrounds. But from my understanding, there's been various political movements over the years to address the issues that Afro-Colombians have faced. And so there is legislation in Colombia that defines them as a protected group, right? And so that's a significantly different context than being Black in the United States, right? Just as one example, or being Black in Canada, or being Black in Jamaica, where the country is run by Black people, at least in terms of policymakers. But there's a series of other geopolitical issues that lead to the challenges that they face and raise the question of, to what extent do they have control over their country to address certain issues? And so again, under critical race theory, understanding how the history of race has functioned throughout the Americas and its links back to Europe and Africa, particularly West Africa and Central Africa, and particularly Western Europe, I should say, are critical into understanding how certain social systems came into place and how we can best navigate them equitably. So I think, obviously there's more you'd have to delve into in a given situation, depending on where you are geographically, what culture, and what group of people you're dealing with ethnically. But again, that opens up a whole door of understanding that if we don't discuss critical race theory, we're cutting ourselves off from a whole body of in-depth information that is very, very useful. So it's really about, like, what are the tools we want to have, having the proper tools to progress and evolve and make, our country, in the case of the United States, like, truly great. Like, why wouldn't we want to use all those tools? Just to use like a sports metaphor, right? Like, if your favorite sports team, didn't win the championship last year, you go into the next season like, okay, what do we need to improve? You don't just tell yourself we're the greatest, even though you clearly have been taking like losses. Like, you don't do that. You're like, okay, well, do we need to rethink how we play? Do we need this player, that player? Like, that's just common knowledge. But why wouldn't we do that with our society? Particularly, again, in the United States, we're a very sports crazed country. So we understand this concept, but we have so much trouble applying it to like who we are as a nation. It's just quite fascinating.
Thank you, Bayeté. And as we are continuing our dialogue on identity, Yolanda, I want to explore a bit your relationship with the character Jada in The Chi. So she is a nurse, a caregiver, and a single mother who is both strong and resilient. And what I want to know is, in what ways do you engage the character to reframe incorrect narratives about Black single mothers and Black single motherhood?
There's so many stereotypes about the Black mother. There's the Black mother who has a bunch of kids and no husband or no partner. There's the Black woman, the Black mother who is on welfare, that is, working the system. There's all these negative connotations of Black women, where the reality is we are Black women and we are strong. We have taken care of this country since its inception. You know, we raised the Black kids, the white woman, the Black woman, the white woman we took care of the white men, we took care of the land, the animals. We raised this country. And to be able to play Jada and show her common sense, you know, that Black women rule with, that Black women live by, I'm so thankful for the opportunity, because it's to show that, yes, we are strong. Yes, we are vulnerable. That side is there. Yeah, we don't want to have to take care of everything all the time. We are human. You know, just that simple fact. There's so many things that I love getting to do through this character, and just showing her to be, you know, a woman, a human. The human factor alone is one of those things that I don't think a lot of times people just look at Black women in that way. You know, the Black mother, she has feelings, emotions. She wants love. She wants affection. You know, just having affection is something a lot of times women go without. And, you know, it might sound like a trivial thing in some ways, or, oh yeah, she's looking for love, or da 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 da. No, companionship in someone's life, all these things that help prolong life, help, you know, ease the mind, ease the stress. You know, I think we're up against a lot, and I don't think people really realize just how all these things coming at us at times affect us. It's a weight, you know, when you just really are looking for the simplest things in life to, you know, keep going just like everybody else. You know, we're here to take care of our own, take care of others. That's one thing I do feel that I see amongst Black women, in the Black mothers in the world, looking out for others, you know, giving that little bit of just advice that they know, something that you, as say a younger Black woman, may not know. You know, those little things that I feel Black women do.
Thank you. And on the flip side of that question, Kamasi, given your work with young high schoolers and you being a Black male, your interaction with other young Black boys, how do you go ahead and engage Black boys and also correct incorrect narratives about Black boyhood or Black manhood?
You know, I'll say three quick things. I think the first thing that I do with Black boys is listen. Find that, you know, even in my profession, there's a lot of talking at young people instead of listening and then talking with young people, you know. So giving, you know, honoring the humanity of young Black boys, just acknowledging their ability and acknowledging their humanity, and just listening to them speak about the truths of their lives, you know, good, bad, or indifferent. So that's the first thing that I do. And the second thing that I do is offer them the space to be. One of the things that can be very challenging, especially within the public school context, is that outside of the formal classroom setting and outside of sports, there are very few spaces where Black boys engage adults where the adults aren't on either the defense, or they're engaging adults within the context of, you know, reprimand or punishment. And so, you know, along with listening to Black boys, I like to create spaces where they can just exist and be without fearing reprimand, without feeling being watched, surveilled, without feeling that they even have to perform, right? Because, you know, I have to perform on the basketball field or football field. I have to perform with my friends. I have to perform, you know, and they're in front of the opposite sex or the same sex or whatever. And so for me, that's the second thing, is just giving them the space to kind of be. And then the third thing is you know, challenging them to consider other options and other narratives. You know, and that really has to do more so for me, that I can do that better on the individual level, but even on the collective level, when I'm dealing with several, you know, young men, you know, I always like to try to challenge, you know, the prevailing notions of what they are understanding boyhood or manhood to be. So challenging these narrow aspects of masculinity, you know, pushing them to consider how they're dealing with themselves, how they're dealing with the opposite sex, how they're dealing with the same sex, how they're dealing with parents, how they view the world, and giving them, you know, counter narratives. And so, you know, those are the three ways that I help Black boys. And then the last thing I do is teach them formally. Like that's comes last, because if I can't listen to you, if I can't allow you to be you, if I can't engage you, and if I can't give you an alternative vision to reimagine what your life is, I can't teach you in the first place. You won't even receive me. You won't even listen to me. So that's how I approach it.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just want to remind folks in the audience, go ahead and put in questions in the Q&A that may be answered at the end of our event. So Bayeté, as a photographer, I was really touched by the Taking Aim series that you did, and I'm hoping you can share some details about that project for those who may not be familiar, and also touch on the motivations behind this series and the outcomes that you were looking to have.
You know, when you said that, I totally realized I didn't show that work at the beginning, and I was like, oops, why didn't I show that? It was I was thinking of a different narrative that would be like directly useful to Juneteenth. But anyway, so the Taking Aim series is a series I created that looks at targets and questions what is evoked when someone looks at a target, and also what are the structural mechanisms of violence and how do we live with violence. And part of what I'm really curious about are, well, there's a couple of things I'm really curious about with that work. One, I'm curious about who gets perceived as a victim and who gets perceived as a threat. And then how does that perception of victim or threat actually affect the likelihood of someone being involved in interpersonal violence or even state sanctioned violence. And then another element of that project that I'm curious about is where do we draw the line between acceptable recreational violence and deplorable violence, which I think is a really fascinating question, because human beings have lived with violence throughout our existence, and we tend to talk about it as a problem a lot of the times, but that's in a very specific capacity. And there's numerous ways that we have very acceptable violence on a daily basis within our societies. And we could even argue that it's, you know, productive. I think that a sport like boxing does a lot of really, really great things for a lot of people who participate in it. Obviously, you have to be careful because you're training people to concuss each other, but I think there's very substantial merits to, say, a sport like boxing, just as one example. I'm going to share some images so you all can see some of the images I'm referring to from the Taking Aim series. Just as a series that features me, and it just kind of questions this idea of who is a victim or threat. And these are basically a series of targets that I made of different people. These essentially were outtakes from Our Kind of People. And I first had the idea for this project because I went to a shooting range in California, and I noticed that none of the targets people used actually looked like a person you might encounter in daily life. They looked like caricatures from like a cops and robbers fantasy. And the reality is, if you're going to be involved in interpersonal violence using firearms, it's probably going to be like with someone who looks like one of your neighbors. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I said, okay, what happens if we make these targets more clearly identifiable as human people? So I made these targets. Interestingly enough, these are like a bunch of my friends who allowed me to make their pictures into targets. And then I took them to the firing range and shot them. And then I also tried to get people at the firing range to shoot my targets with me. And in some cases, I took the people who are in the photos of the targets with me to shoot the targets of themselves. And so that was how I kind of approached layering these ideas of violence and recreational violence versus deplorable violence, and how we wrap our minds around it, where the symbol of the target, shooting the target as recreation, shooting it with my friends who are in the photos, and these are targets of us, and then engaging in different conversations about who is considered a victim and a threat, and what is the significance of that in our own interpersonal situations, but also in the larger scheme of life.
Did you do more in exploring the way in which unconscious or conscious bias informs who is being shot and who we decide not to shoot?
Not formally as a part of this project, meaning I did not include statistical data on who becomes a victim of gun violence, who becomes a victim of police violence, so on and so forth. My thinking is that this project will evoke some sort of response from whoever the given audience member is, and then they can pursue that and will likely pursue that on their own. I felt like, and I could be wrong about this, but I felt like once you delve into violence and guns, it can become such a loaded topic that you have to be careful of leading people too much in one direction, because if people get the impression that you're making a really trite statement that they disagree with about a complicated issue, sometimes they can tune out. So that's why I haven't done that. But it's not as if I'm closed off to it. I just didn't find a way to do that I thought would really be effective in terms of pushing forward the ideas of the work. But I'd also like to say, going to firing ranges and shooting with people, it was really fascinating experience. Because again, you're in this situation where everyone is very respectful, everyone's very safe, everyone's very thoughtful. There's people of a bunch of different backgrounds. And it was one of those things where I was like, oh, I exist in the world as an artist, and I'm in certain populations more often than others. And I really started to understand why gun owners can feel as if they are unfairly stereotyped and misrepresented in pop culture abroad. I'm not abroad, like outside of the United States, but in a broad sense. Because I encountered people who are really thoughtful about gun safety and the challenges that access to guns represents. But I could also see how if someone is very, very safe with how they handle their firearms, that it would be very insulting if someone who's not a gun owner is acting like they don't know what they're doing when they practice that on a regular basis. So it's just another key point of thinking about, okay, what are these other perspectives that exist out there? And then how do we acknowledge their validity, even if we think that their conclusion on a specific topic is incorrect? How do we acknowledge what else is valid about that perspective in order for us to collectively move forward and progress with a social issue?
Thank you, Bayeté. And in transitioning a little bit and making a connection to our center, we do a lot of work that is based on Black maternal health. And there's a saying that art imitates life. And in The Shy, we are presented with news of your character, Yolonda Jada, who is diagnosed with cancer. And so my question to you is, how do you think that reality informs the way Jada navigates the healthcare system on her own, and how those who can relate to her diagnosis seek care?
That's a good one. my character, even though we haven't gone into it a lot, she is in the healthcare system. She did take care of elderly people at first, and then she moved into more of a gynecologist, like a Planned Parenthood kind of place. We only touched upon that a little bit in the last season. I feel, because it's not really, they don't really go into it, how, on the show, how she went about, getting care, but she is seeing a doctor and she is going through chemo right now. Something that, I learned with going through this process is about the healthcare disparities and just how bad they can be sometimes, where, I talked to a woman who she went to like three different hospitals, and she felt something in her body was not right. First one, oh, it's probably the flu. And then the second one, it's probably, you're probably just dealing with cold, something like that. And that nobody ran an MRI, nobody did any testing on her. Black woman. It's unexcusable that these doctors are not listening to what people are saying about their bodies. And I will say, it's because of race, that a lax point of view has happened. And I've heard it in, not just her case, but I've heard it in other cases. I think that's something, that these organizations like Center of Health Equity Transformation, Equal Hope, that these organizations are helping people navigate this, because that's the thing. First off, not even finding out and getting diagnosed, that's one issue. But then getting the proper care, you get diagnosed, then what? Like my character was in a shock, as I think anybody would be, when you find out that you're diagnosed with something like this. So, because in your head, it's a death sentence in your head. Now what? How bad is it? Going through chemo. Nobody wants to go through that, knowing that, especially with breast cancer, you will lose hair. It will affect you. It's killing other cells as well, not just the cancer, but, will you be able to deal with that? Do you have to take off from work? You will have to, how will you pay for it? Is your insurance good enough to cover it? Will it cover it? Will you get dropped? All these different things that are stresses, in life. So, as far as my character dealing with it, she's dealing with it in a limited way because we are a series, we are a TV show. But I wanted to make sure that we showed as much as I could possibly, push and get done. Like things that I don't think the average person knows when they when they get diagnosed, what they'll have to go through. Fingernails turning black or brown, not being able to use parts of your body because you're getting chemo in that part of your body. Healthcare navigators, that's a huge thing. On the show, I have my friend Dre going to these appointments with me, but a lot of times people are alone. And that alone, having somebody to navigate this with you, ask the questions that need to be asked, go up against the doctors if you don't think that you're getting the right kind of care, or they're answering the questions that you need, because there's a lot of times you just don't know, and your family members might not even know what to ask. That's a thing, just even in talking to your family about this, because I feel the families need to go through a certain kind of, the families and the person themselves need to talk to somebody to kind of navigate them all through it, because it's not something that you just automatically know how to deal with or handle, and everybody's different. Not everybody even knows how to talk to somebody that's going through cancer. So, just that little bit of just communication and knowing how to talk to somebody and be there for them. Because to me, that's the biggest thing. If you just make yourself available, let them know if they need, or even just do little things for them, because the person might not want you to be there all the time or be there, kind of causing more stresses sometimes, because that can happen with family. It's all these little things that I think that need to be shown, exposed, talked about. And healthcare navigators are huge. I feel like I'm forgetting things because there's so many things within this topic that just need to be talked about, and vocalized and shown, that women go through, breast cancer, and men too. But I would say this though, one of the biggest things is mammograms. I'd say do them earlier than later. And there's a number of places you can go for them, because I've had a lot of friends, or not a lot, several friends die from cancer before even making it to 40. So, get checked out, check your own body because you can. And just if you have any kind of questions about your body, go in and get checked out. That's all. Just get checked out.
I just
Thank
want
you.
to piggyback what Yolanda discussed really quickly, and
Yeah, go
kind of
ahead.
draw a connection there that sometimes doesn't happen. When the vaccines were coming out, right, there were certain populations of people who weren't necessarily anti-vax, but were skeptical, like wait and see, right? And so what Yolanda's talking about in terms of particularly how Black women are treated by the medical professions directly correlates to why, if you're a Black woman or a Black person and you have been historically, your concerns by the medical profession have been historically ignored. When you've gone in because you had certain problems and you're like, I feel like something's wrong. And they're like, oh, you're psychosomatic. Oh, and they dismiss you. Now we have it circle back where the medical establishment needs us to trust them, and they have not built that trust. And I think there's a direct connection between that. And some of the skepticisms, I noticed a lot of Black and Latin American descendant people had when the vaccines first came out, particularly older folks. It wasn't like they were like, oh, the vaccine is bad. They're like, I'm going to wait to see what other information I can find out, because I'm not going to take this as face value from them who have historically not had the best relationship with us. So I think that's a very important thing to consider in terms of those connections.
Thank you both. Those are very amazing points to make here. And as a center, it's something that we hold important, making sure that we do the work in these communities to build that trust, which is essential to anything that we do, trust within our Black and Brown community members, because if health equity is our goal, we can't get anywhere without that. And my last question.
One more thing about.
Oh, yes, go ahead.
Sorry. Because you just brought it up about in the communities, because that's where I really saw, the help happening is within the communities. Like in the South Side, the Blue Hat Foundation that deals with cervical cancer, and the Women on Top of Their Game in the South Side of Chicago, they were helping each other, because they know about those disparities. They've gone through those disparities with the healthcare system. And so those women were helping each other, or are helping each other navigate this, and I just thought it was beautiful how, they just took it upon themselves to do it, and they've been through it. So, hats off to them.
Yes, thank you so much. So my last question, I will prompt to Kamasi first and then allow Bayeté and Yolanda to answer as well. How do we keep non-Black people from using Juneteenth as a reason to claim racism has ended and that we are a colorblind society?
I think the best way to do that is to control the is to attempt to control the narrative as much as possible. You know, we're living we live and exist within a marketplace of ideas. You know, good, bad, or indifferent. We have to engage this marketplace of ideas constantly. You know, Franz Fanon said, you know, out of relative obscurity, you know, we have a mission. Either we, you know, we fulfill or betray it. And I think the each generation has to continue to fulfill that mission of keeping our struggle, our narrative, our identity, our fight at the forefront, and don't allow others who are either in our community who don't have our best interests, or outside of our community who are attempting to control our interests, to control the narrative. And that's the best way to do it. And that's why I said what I said earlier about the kind of the delicate balance of actually declaring Juneteenth an actual holiday, right? Because once you do that, you know, you relinquish some control over defining what Juneteenth is. Because if you lose, you know, because once it becomes an institution, then, you know, and it becomes institutionalized, you give other folks to determine, you know, what it is. So that's going to be our challenge, one of our many challenges. But I think the best way to approach any struggle, particularly when it comes to something like this, is to you know, keep on pushing and driving the narrative and controlling the narrative from within our own communities based off our own self-interest, and don't allow others to do that.
Thank you. Bayeté, do you have any thoughts on that question?
Yeah, first take a deep breath and make sure you don't choke them out. No, I'm joking, of course. I think Kamasi is spot on that regard. One of the most significant points that really resonated with me is we do have to understand that once something becomes institutionalized, it belongs to us all, not just to us, the smaller community. And that's part of the give and take of, you know, I'm going to say crossing over into the mainstream, for lack of a better phrase. I think we can also try to make sure we're well equipped with an active understanding of history and can express it in a concise, compelling way, and cite accessible sources to then explain to people that, you know, actually, because Juneteenth is now being federally recognized, that's the start of making sure we get rid of racism, but it's only one step in the process. And also to question the idea of there being a quintessential moment when racism is over. Like, that doesn't really make sense. Because people are always going to separate themselves based on something, and they'll always have some sort of bias. And addressing institutionalized racism within the United States doesn't inherently address racism within a specific ethnic group, not to mention racism between them. So I think there's ways to carefully and gently explain to people that that's an absurd idea to think that that could be a moment, while still acknowledging that this is important and this is a step in the right direction. I think that's the approach to take.
And Yolanda, I'll turn to you.
Well, I would say pretty much what they've both already said. I mean, controlling the narrative, you know, as much as you can, because it's true. Once something becomes, I'll call it commercialized, because it's a bigger thing now, and money is always involved, you know, and what this country is then saying about it. There is, you know, the past and what historically what that time was and what it means to us, but it's the continuous talk about current events, current things that are happening. that are in the same vein, that it all is together, it's this country and what we've done in the past and what we continue to do, because it's a frame of mind. Juneteenth happened because of a certain people's frame of mind, and that is still here in this country. So we have to keep shedding the light on these things in real ways when Juneteenth is talked about.
Thank you to all of our speakers today. I will go ahead and transition to some audience Q&A. We had some answered in the chat, so please refer to those. But one question which wasn't answered is this: race was created for commodification, and Black people have rightly owned Blackness for themselves. Should we worry about the next couple of generations of Black kids that are assimilating, maybe mitigating the pain of our history? And I will ask that Kamasi or Bayeté take a stab at answering this question here.
Can you repeat that one more time for me?
Sure. Race was created for commodification, and Black people have rightly owned Blackness for themselves. So should we worry about the next couple of generations of Black kids that are assimilating, maybe mitigating the pain of our history?
I would suggest one slight revision. I would say race is definitely a construct, like a social construct that is often outside of our control. I think Blackness is something that is way more something that we can control, that is inclusive of more than just the social construct of race, right? So I would say, the best way to move forward, bringing the conversation back full circle, is to draw upon the best of our struggle. And the best of our struggle is always attempting to try to identify the things that bring us the most joy on an individual and collective level, as well as the most power on the communal level. And I think the only way that we can do that is by continuing to struggle, continuing to fight, but also continuing to provide the space to innovate and create. Because I think that you can't really talk about political struggle and social empowerment without talking about creativity and imagination. And to me, that's what the best of Blackness is all about, right? It's reimagining and providing this creative space for envisioning what our community needs and what we need on an individual level at any point given in time.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add to that is it's reasonable to be concerned about that. Like, I think that's a reasonable concern, but I think that can be dealt with and addressed by making sure, well, first of all, we want each generation of our people, both Black people and the entire country, well, the entire human race, to be able to evolve and become a different, hopefully better version of us. And so I think the younger generations assimilating more is a mark of progress in a lot of ways. But what I think I'm hearing in the question, and what is a legitimate concern, is that in that process, they don't become too disconnected with the historical foundation of what got them to this point to even be able to assimilate in the way that they are. And an awareness that these moments of comfort for them don't mean that history is irrelevant. The history of the social systems that led to the current moment are irrelevant, and that it's not relevant to know or understand or continue to investigate how racism and white supremacy are negatively affecting all of us, right? And sometimes we get focused on thinking that, you know, issues of race are primarily for Black people or Latinx people or, you know, people of East Asian or South Asian ancestry, but they're really issues for everyone, right? Like, if we look at the United States, in most scenarios when progress has been made um, for Black people, so to speak, when you look at the ripple effects of the results, it actually made the country better for everyone. And I think we have to stop, we have to condition ourselves to not think of it as, oh, this is Black progress, but like, no, this is American progress. This is human progress. And that is a very important thing.
Powerful words to end on. Thank you so much, Bayeté, Kamasi, and Yolanda. I'll go ahead and close us out for the event. So just yesterday, Juneteenth became recognized as a national holiday. And of course, while it is a cause for celebration, to allies of racial equity work, I am calling on to you to say that the work is not done. Our country has not fully achieved equity, whether it be racial, health, economic, environmental, or otherwise. And Juneteenth is inherently tied to the legacy of slavery. And it's important that we keep up the legacy of resistance that was tied to slavery, which has not ended, but only evolved into forms of incarceration and other forms of hypersurveillance. Juneteenth is about liberation. And if that is truly to be achieved, white and non-Black POC partners must put to action some of the tenets for equity, which includes listening to Black stories, voices, and truths, providing opportunities for growth, leadership, and advancement, economic equity, supporting and sponsoring Black art and artists, and so much more. And for my Black folks, let's celebrate, rest, and share in Black joy together. This is our day. So thank you all again for joining us this afternoon. Again, our wonderful speakers, Dr. Kamasi Hill, Bayeté Ross-Smith, and Yolonda Ross. For all those who are subscribed to our center's newsletter, you'll be receiving a list of artists handpicked by our panelists today to check out. So everyone have a great rest of your Friday afternoon, a blessed weekend, and take care. Thank you.